For 22 years, Carl Oatman slept on the streets of Dallas. Sidewalks, bridges, jail cells. The county was spending roughly $40,000 a year cycling men like him through emergency rooms and courtrooms. Then one morning, the city handed Carl the keys to his own little house near downtown, with a front porch and a door that locked. And here is the part nobody expected. Giving him that home for free actually saved taxpayers money. This is the story of the Cottages at Hickory Crossing, a village where 50 of the most written-off people in Dallas now tend gardens, feed stray cats, and drink morning coffee on their own front porches. To understand why Dallas would build houses for homeless people, you first have to understand the trap they were caught in. Officials in Dallas County had a nickname for a certain group of people living on the streets. They called them frequent flyers. These were the men and women who kept showing up over and over in the most expensive places a city has: the emergency room at Parkland Hospital, the county jail, the psychiatric ward, the detox center. Picture a man sleeping under Interstate 30 in a Texas summer. He has untreated schizophrenia, maybe an old addiction, maybe a criminal record from 20 years ago that keeps him from ever getting hired or renting an apartment. In August, the heat sends him to the emergency room with dehydration. In winter, it is frostbite or pneumonia. When his behavior scares someone downtown, police pick him up, and he spends a few nights in jail. Then the doors open, and he walks right back to the same sidewalk. Nothing has changed except the bill. County officials sat down and did the math on this cycle, and the numbers stunned them. Each chronically homeless person in this group was costing taxpayers around $40,000 a year. Not in food or shelter or any actual help, $40,000 a year in ambulances, hospital beds, jail cells, and court dates. Money spent managing a crisis instead of ending it. And the cruelest part is that all that spending left these people exactly where they started, on the concrete, 1 year older and 1 year sicker. Shelters existed, of course, but shelters are built for emergencies, not for lives. You line up in the evening, you sleep in a room full of strangers, and you carry everything you own back onto the street at sunrise. For someone with severe mental illness or decades of trauma, a crowded shelter can feel more dangerous than a quiet spot under a bridge. Many refused to go, so the city kept paying, the hospitals kept treating, and the people kept suffering. Somebody had to ask a different question. That somebody was a man named Larry James, the head of a Dallas nonprofit called City Square. Larry was not the kind of leader who studied homelessness from behind a desk. To understand what his neighbors were actually living through, he went and slept under the Hickory Street Bridge himself, lying on the ground among the people everyone else drove past. And what he learned there shaped everything that came after. The people under that bridge did not need another sandwich or another sermon. They needed what every human being needs first: a door, a lock, a place where their few belongings would still be there in the morning. That idea has a name. It is called Housing First, and it flips the traditional approach upside down. For decades, the system told homeless people to earn their way indoors. Get sober first, get treated first, get a job first, then maybe housing. Housing First says the opposite. Nobody gets sober, sane, or employed while sleeping on concrete and wondering who might hurt them tonight. Give people a stable home first, and then treatment and recovery finally have a chance to stick. It sounds almost too simple. It also sounds expensive. But Larry James and his partners believed Dallas was already paying the highest possible price by doing nothing. So City Square joined forces with the Central Dallas Community Development Corporation, Dallas County, the courts, the hospital system, and a group of generous private donors. The W. Caruth Jr. Foundation put millions into the effort. Altogether, the project would cost about $6.8 million. And here was the boldest part of the plan. They were not going to help the easiest cases first. They pulled the county's data and deliberately went after the 50 hardest, costliest, most written-off people in all of Dallas. The ones with severe mental illness, the ones with long rap sheets, the ones who had been outside not for months, but for decades. If Housing First could work for them, it could work for anyone. Choosing those 50 people was a project in itself. Chad Baker, the assistant director at the Development Corporation, explained that the team started with the county's own list of so-called frequent flyers, the people most often arrested and most often carried into Parkland Hospital. Social workers then went out and found them, one by one, under bridges and behind buildings, and asked them a question most of them had stopped believing anyone would ever ask. Would you like a home of your own? Some said yes immediately. Others were suspicious, because life had taught them that nothing is ever really free. It took patience, repeated visits, and a lot of coffee to earn their trust. The Dallas City Council took the vote, and it passed without a single voice against it. One councilwoman, Voncielle Jones Hill, put the whole philosophy into one sentence. She said that if you do not even have a closet to hang your suit in, you cannot begin to think about looking for a job. Construction began on a 3.5-acre lot just south of Deep Ellum in the shadow of the downtown Dallas skyline. What rose from that lot did not look like a shelter or an institution. It looked like a neighborhood. 50 tiny cottages, each around 420 square feet, arranged in clusters like a little village or a summer camp. Gray and industrial on the outside, clean and cozy on the inside. Each one held a real bed, a bathroom, a kitchenette, and a front porch facing a shared green courtyard. In the middle of it all sat a community building with laundry machines, offices, and meeting rooms. Not everyone was cheering. Skeptics wondered aloud whether people who had spent 20 years on the street could really live in houses, whether the village would collapse into chaos within a year, whether this was compassion or just an expensive experiment. The answer was coming. In the fall of 2016, the Cottages at Hickory Crossing officially opened their doors. Mayor Mike Rawlings stood before the little gray houses and told the crowd that the answer to homelessness is homes, and that today, Dallas was celebrating homes. Then came the moment that mattered more than any speech. One by one, 50 people who had been sleeping on concrete were handed keys. A 46-year-old Dallas native named Jimmy Couples walked into his cottage, looked around at his own bed and his own television, and could barely find the words. "Amazing," he said. "Remarkable." Carl Oatman, the man who had survived 22 years outside, settled onto his new front porch and later said that if you come from where he came from, this place is heaven. Another resident, Chester Anderson, had battled depression since childhood and drug addiction through adulthood. He called his tiny house the first real home he had ever had in his life, and a godsend. Grown men and women, many of them in their 50s and 60s, receiving their first ever front door key. But handing over the keys was the easy part. Now these 50 neighbors, each carrying a lifetime of trauma, had to actually live together. Walk through the cottages today, and the first thing that strikes you is how ordinary it feels, in the best possible way. Cats and kittens lounge under the trees between the gray, green, and brown houses. Garden beds sit in neat rows in the courtyard. In December, Christmas trees twinkle in the little windows, and the smell of homemade stew drifts out onto the sidewalk. Neighbors push carts of groceries home from the Catholic Charities food pantry right across the street. A resident named Lisa Warren explained why the place means so much to her. "Everything here is mine," she said. "Things that are just mine, that no one can take away from me." After years where everything she owned could be stolen while she slept, that sentence says everything. But the cottages were never just houses. That community building in the center is the engine that makes the whole village run. Inside it, residents get free medical care, mental health counseling, support groups, addiction recovery meetings, and practical classes on how to live indoors again. Because that is a real thing people have to relearn. How to pay a bill, how to cook on a stove, how to sleep through the night without keeping one eye open. Caseworkers know every resident by name and check on them constantly. This model is called permanent supportive housing, and both words matter. Permanent, because nobody is thrown out after 90 days. Supportive, because a key alone cannot heal 30 years of damage. A typical day at the cottages looks almost boring, and for the people who live there, Boring is the whole point. Morning coffee on the porch while the downtown skyline glows over the rooftops. A walk across the street to pick up groceries. A doctor's appointment that is 30 steps away instead of an ambulance ride away. An afternoon nap behind a locked door, which sounds like a small thing until you have spent years unable to sleep deeply because someone might steal your shoes. In the evening, neighbors gather in the courtyard, feed the cats, water the garden beds, and talk. Some residents have reconnected with children and grandchildren they had not seen in years, because for the first time in decades, they have an address to invite them to. Family members who once drove around downtown searching for a missing father now simply knock on his front door. And there are rules. This is not a free-for-all. Residents pay a small portion in rent when they can. They cannot disrupt their neighbors, and they have to respect the community. Those who follow the rules can stay for as long as they live. For people who had been rejected by every system in America, that promise of forever changed everything. Before we get to the results, there is one more face of this story. Walk through any homeless encampment in America, and you will find men and women who once wore a military uniform. If someone in your family served, or if you yourself are struggling with money, behind on bills, or worried about keeping a roof overhead, we put together a free guide called The Veteran's Blueprint. It walks through the benefits and programs most veterans never claim, step by step, in far more detail than one video allows. The link is in the description, whether you are fighting to get back on your feet or trying to help someone you love do the same. Take a look after the video. So the big question, did the cottages actually work? Let's look at the numbers first because they tell a remarkable story. Remember, each of these residents used to cost Dallas County about $40,000 a year in emergency rooms, jails, and courts. Housing them at the cottages, with all the medical care and counseling included, costs about $15,000 a year per person. Multiply that difference across 50 residents, and Dallas saves an estimated $1.25 million every single year. Compassion turned out to be the fiscally responsible choice. The kindest option and the cheapest option were the same option all along, and the savings are only half of it. Doctors will tell you that stable housing is itself a form of medicine. Once residents had a refrigerator, they could store insulin and blood pressure medication. Once they had an address, they could keep follow-up appointments instead of only appearing in emergency rooms at death's door. Once they could sleep safely, their minds began to settle enough for therapy to work. Conditions that had been treated as endless emergencies for 20 years finally started being managed like ordinary chronic illnesses. That is what the $40,000 a year had never been able to buy on the street. Then there are the human results. 2 years after opening, half of the original residents were still living in their cottages. That might sound modest until you remember who these 50 people were. The hardest cases in the entire county. People who had failed out of every shelter and every program for decades. Hospital visits dropped, arrests dropped. Men and women who had been invisible for 20 years were suddenly gardening, cooking, attending support groups, and greeting their neighbors from their porches. Carl Oatman was still on his porch a year and a half in, telling reporters he loved his home. For people who measure success in headlines, half might seem like a disappointment. For people who understand chronic homelessness, it was close to a miracle. But this is a documentary, not a commercial, so let's be honest about the other half of the story. Roughly 15% of residents left the cottages and returned to life on the street. The pull of addiction, the weight of mental illness, and the strange comfort of the familiar proved stronger than a warm bed for some. Staff will tell you that a person who has survived decades outside sometimes finds 4 walls suffocating. Others broke the community rules and lost their place. Every empty cottage represented a heartbreak for the caseworkers who had fought for that resident. The project itself hit turbulence too. Running a village of 50 deeply traumatized people takes enormous money, energy, and patience, year after year after year. Funding had to be found again and again. Staff burned out. Even Monica Eggert Smith of the Caruth Foundation, one of the project's biggest backers, admitted early on that every provider's role was essential and that there would be bumps along the way. She was right. In the summer of 2022, after years of carrying the project, City Square handed management of the cottages over to the Central Dallas Community Development Corporation, the nonprofit that had originally developed the property. The village survived the transition. The Christmas trees still went up that December, but the lesson was clear. Building the houses is the beginning of the work, not the end of it. And yet, for all the bumps, the experiment proved something that no report or study had ever managed to prove so vividly. Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins said it plainly. The cottages were never meant to be the end-all solution to homelessness. They were a first step, a demonstration, and other cities were watching closely. In the years since Hickory Crossing opened, tiny home villages for the homeless have spread across the country. Austin built an entire neighborhood of them. Communities in California, Oregon, Washington, and beyond have followed with their own versions, many pointing to the same housing-first logic that Dallas tested on its 50 hardest cases. The little gray cottages south of Deep Ellum became proof that the question was never whether we can afford to house the homeless. We were already paying more to keep them on the street. Dallas itself did not stop there. Even back at the opening in 2016, county officials were talking about the next ideas, including plans to convert large shipping containers into additional homes for people coming out of jail with nowhere to go. The cottages had cracked open a door in people's imagination. Once a city has watched a man like Carl Oatman go from 22 years under a bridge to tending a garden outside his own front porch, it becomes very hard to argue that homelessness is simply how things have to be. It starts to look like a choice a city makes. Because in the end, this story was never really about architecture. 420 square feet is not much. You probably have closets bigger than these homes. But Dallas gave Carl Oatman, Lisa Warren, Chester Anderson, and Jimmy Couples something bigger than square footage. A front door, a porch to sit on, a neighbor to wave at. Things that are just mine, as Lisa put it, that no one can take away from me. Every one of those 50 residents was once somebody's baby, somebody's classmate, somebody's co-worker, before life came apart. The cottages at Hickory Crossing simply bet that they could be somebody's neighbor again. And for most of them, that bet paid off. So the next time you drive past someone sleeping under a bridge, remember the frequent flyers of Dallas and remember what changed them. It was not a lecture and it was not a jail cell. It was a key. Every week on this channel, we tell the stories of forgotten people and the communities fighting to bring them home. And there is one story on your screen right now that shows what happened when another American city tried something even bolder. Click it, and I will see you there.